How many of you ever watch Late Night with David Letterman? There's a few of you. There's a running gag called stupid pet tricks. You probably see, even if you don't watch David Letterman, you've heard of stupid pet tricks. Anyway, there's something I call stupid city tricks. And you may never have heard it called that, but I'm sure you've seen the evidence. If you're old enough, like me, you remember Nicollet Mall. Nicollet Mall is in Minneapolis. It was Minneapolis' decision to tear up Main Street with its cars, replace it with a pedestrian mall, and the pedestrian mall was going to save downtown. And then Minneapolis decided that it would build skywalks, one story up, glass enclosed, connectors from building to building to building, which of course would remove people from Nicollet Mall and the surrounding streets, but it would keep people safe and warm. But because people were moving out of downtown at that time, they decided they needed someone to fill up those skywalks and Nicollet Mall, so they decided conventioneers would do the trick. So they needed to build a convention center, and every convention center needed a convention center hotel, and that was going to save downtown. And most of you, I'm sure, have been to Boston's Faneuil Hall, Baltimore's Inner Harbor, very similar. Shops, restaurants, carts of retail, always changing. It was quickly dubbed festival retail. That was the newest idea. And it was festival retail would probably save downtown. And Inner Harbor then begat the aquarium, and that seemed like a good idea. So, maybe it was actually big fish in spectacular settings that would save downtown. Oh, and basketball players, because actually most cities decided that arenas were really a critical element in making downtown work. And then, of course, it was not enough to save downtown. You needed to save the whole city, so you better get on board with biotech, because biotech would save cities. And so it goes, sort of city after city after city doing the same thing, sort of following blindly along. And it was, I think, the herd instinct that operates in every industry, but certainly operates in cities. It was the herd instinct at its most powerful. I think so powerful, in fact, that it really sort of slapped the distinctiveness out of a lot of cities, and it replaced it with this mind-numbing sameness that sort of characterizes way too many American cities today, and certainly most American suburbs. In some cases, these projects made sense. They were and are successful. But when every city copied every innovation, they became what I call stupid city tricks. Tricks designed to succeed on someone else's terms, copied mindlessly without the benefit of the same context, the same history, the same market conditions. And I think to some extent that's what Mayor Cicilline was talking about had happened in Providence, this sort of gleam, this shine on top of what was rotting underneath. And that's why I call it stupid city tricks. And it was sort of realizing that had gone on. I started my career in downtown redevelopment and then worked in City Hall and so forth, and was really frustrated by this copying that was going on in cities. And so I decided to start a local public radio show that I called Smart City. And the idea was, in a lot of ways, to sort of expose what was going on in cities, and more importantly, to figure out what should replace it. And the original concept for the show, it was a half-hour show, and the original concept was to combine a local official, a local Memphis official, with a national expert, his or her counterpart, someone who was doing something really exemplary nationally. So I would have, say, our Mayor Harrington, Mayor Willie Harrington, and I would pair him with sort of the dean of mayors, Joe Riley in Charleston, who's been mayor there 26 years. I took our local transit official and teamed him with Fred Hansen, who runs the wonderful Portland transit system. And the idea was to see if the local officials could hold their own. And in a lot of cases, they didn't. And I realized quickly I was going to run out of local guests. They were going to refuse to come on. Second, I realized that my supply of national guests was sort of endless. And the third thing I realized, and this was for me kind of the real breakthrough, is that Memphis had these problems, but so did every other city, in some shape, form, or fashion, in some greater or lesser degree of urgency. So I decided that we would take the show national, expand it to an hour, and only have a national guest, or people that I thought really had a story to tell that would resonate and was worthy of national telling. We didn't want to talk about best practices. We're sort of determined not to do that because, as you know, I think once something is recognized as a best practice, it's probably not, there's always a better practice. It's just that you haven't yet heard about it. Sort of like Gary Hamel said to me one time, Gary wrote Competing for the Future, and he said, once something is a best practice, it's been promulgated so broadly that it can no longer be a best practice. And I think he's right. So we decided that we would have these national guests, and we would put it out there for a national audience, we hoped. The first station to pick us up was Fort Wayne, Indiana. I had to get a map to find out where Fort Wayne, Indiana was. Like you probably have to get a map to figure out where Memphis is. But Fort Wayne, Indiana picked us up, and we thought, okay, so there's probably a national audience for the show. We think we have an opportunity here. And today we're heard all over this country and Canada. But we're also heard, in fact, quite powerfully over podcast, webcast, and web archives. And we think at the first of the year we'll be on satellite radio, doing some live events as well, and ramping up our web presence. And all that will be key to this theme of Smart City. My greatest hope is, and always has been, that it would spark a real passion for cities. Cities are said to be man's most complex creation, but I think we've treated them in the past few decades as very disposable. We've had federal and state policies that led to the deterioration of cities, and then we fooled ourselves into believing those were market conditions at work, when in fact it was really deliberate federal and state policies that led to the decline of cities. It's interesting if you attach the word urban to any bad word, it becomes worse. Urban poverty is worse than poverty. Urban crime is worse than crime. But the hostility to cities, I think, is unwarranted, and I think it's very dangerous because cities are the centers of our culture. They house our great universities. They're the places where people and ideas and money and markets come together. They are our ports to the world, our airports, and they produce 80% of our jobs, 80+% of our GNP, and 86% of our tax revenue in this country. So cities are not disposable. It's really hard to imagine an America that's competitive without dynamic cities. And it's interesting. We've become so accustomed to this story of decline of cities that the biggest surprise of the 2000 census was that cities were, surprise, coming back. And there were people and money moving to cities. And that was the big surprise of the 2000 census, because all through the 90s, the big story had been the continuing decline of cities. And you're beginning to see it again in the census numbers, and I'll just tell you, don't believe them. Because look around cities, look around this city, and you see redevelopment everywhere. You see old abandoned office buildings, industrial buildings being converted to new uses. You see estate lots being cleared of sort of outmoded houses and being, zero lot line homes of greater value jammed onto those lots. So all of those signs are really look great for cities right now. All the signals are blinking green. I think it's a really good time for those of us who love cities and want them to represent the best of our collective selves. New Orleans jazz musician Wynton Marsalis was talking about the rebuilding of New Orleans, and he said something I really loved. He talked about our capability to rebuild New Orleans, and he said, the type of expertise and wealth that we have in the United States is unparalleled in the world. If we focus our technical and scientific expertise, and if we match it with a soul equation that equals it, we will set an example for the entire world. And Kip, I thought of you when I read Wynton Marsalis's quote about the importance of the soul equation. And he said, if we don't do that, we will have let ourselves down again. So I think an interesting question is, what is the soul equation of this city that will make it, or any city, that will make it one of the world's great cities? And I think that answer can only come from that creative place within all of us, within each of us, and then trying to apply that to the places we inhabit, make that manifest in the places that we live. Do I need to stop? 1 minute. Okay, just really quickly. Earlier this year, I joined an organization called CEOs for Cities. And we do research. That research produces public policy recommendations, and we work on communication across sectors of urban leaders. And we're focusing our work in 4 areas through 4 lenses: the talented city, how to develop, attract, and retain talent; the connected city, how do cities connect with their regions, how does the region connect to the global economy; third is the distinctive city, how can cities discover their differences and those assets on which they can build competitive advantage, and then have the confidence to do that. And fourth, the innovative city, and you know about that. How do you create the environment that spawns new ideas, new jobs, new businesses? If people could remember more than 3 or 4 things, I would add the transparent city. The mayor talked about the importance of that. I think I would add the lovable city and the well-led city. But people can't read. That would be 7 things, and 7 makes no sense. So, we're going to stick with 4. Just to close with this, one of my favorite philanthropists likes to say, places become what people dream. And I love that. And I think that's really always been the purpose of the show, is that it's about getting people to dream about what their cities can be, dream differently about what their cities can be, and then set about doing that. Thanks.